so much for coming to Courageous Conversations, Freedom to Read. I'll hand it back to Deb Alcibi.
Good evening, everybody. Thank you for making time this crazy December month with possible snow on the way, is what I heard. But thank you. Courageous Conversation tries to have conversations once a month. And this was my month, and I'm working with Annette. It's in the back. Annette, raise your hand. We thought that this topic is very timely. There's been things happen locally, things happen nationally, and it seems like we have a book group that's part of Courageous Conversations. We try to read a book every couple of months, and it seems like most of the books that we're reading are on that banned book list. And so we're just like, what is up with that, you know? And just thinking of what we've learned and the conversations that we have, it's a very, very diverse book group. If you ever, want to be able to discuss books with people from all walks of life, people from other, states and stuff during COVID, we had people from all over join us. And it was very rich conversations, lots of learning happens there. But that's kind of what brought this topic on. And Annette and I have gone back and forth with different things and talking to different people. And we really thought it would be great to hear from some of our librarians that are living this and seeing what's happening out there in the world. And then also having an author that can kind of talk from their perspective, like how that affects them when they write books. And I kind of first came upon it, I went to a thing at Harvard with all these women authors, and one of them, Jodi Hall, got up there and said how many of her books are banned. And it's not about, I'm not making any money, it's more that people are out there, being very active about banning books. So like you need to know that that's happening. And it was like, whoa, okay, I had no idea. But then that's what opened my eyes to looking and seeing what else is happening out there and looking at the different lists. And that's like a very, she reads everything, listens on tape. So she kind of helps with the book group picking the books that we're gonna do. So with that, I thought, well, who can we have? We tried to get some state reps to come in and talk about some of the bills that are out there. So the thing is we couldn't get them to show up, but Will from the Milton Library is very active in that, so he can give us kind of a, an idea of what's happening state-wise and actually nationally. We've got Dave Leonard here from the Boston Public Library, and I don't want to break his, exciting what they've done for the, as one of the third in the country, but I won't say what. He'll tell you guys that, but just really exciting, and I had just read that in the Globe before I reached out to him. And then we have Josh, who works with the schools, the Milton Public Schools, and it's definitely, had, things come up in his line of work, and we'll hear from him what, what he's doing or what has happened. And then we have an author of this wonderful book, Mob in Action, Mothers of Black Boys, and kind of like advice, instructions on like what you can do to support your kid of color, especially as a boy. But it's definitely something that I could use for my kids now, and things that I could kick myself for not having used before, but still, it's very, very good. So she'll talk a little bit about that, but everyone will share their story. Karen is going to moderate tonight, and then I passed out some note cards, so if people have questions as we go, just pass them to myself or to Jane, and then we'll gather them, and then we'll try to answer those questions by the end. We do have a group of people on Zoom. A lot of people couldn't make it tonight before COVID's going around and weather, and but that's one of the wonderful things with Courageous Conversations. It used to only be who was here in the room, and now we're able to offer this to people that are not in the room, but also that can be here. So thank you for being here. Thank you guys for being here on Zoom, and let's get started.
Yeah, great. I'll let you hold that mic.
Okay.
If you could go to the next slide, that would be great. So,
Courageous Conversations is always about creating the space, creating the container to have the challenging conversations. So this is how we will go about that. And creating the courageous space asks us to listen with empathy and to open our hearts to learning new things. It asks us to embrace the discomfort. These conversations are not comfortable, and it invites vulnerability in the space, and bring your courageous and brave self The courageous space examines space critically and calls for change.
And examines and things, okay, that's what you just read that
And
one.
then on to the next, we'll have Deb read through the discussion notes.
So, we're gonna, today, as we discuss these things, we'll try on new ideas and ways of thinking, respect and, practice confidentiality, practice self-awareness, use I statements, be aware of intention versus impact, share the space and make room for all voices.
Thank you.
Awesome.
And with that, do you want to intro me as moderator and then I'll go into
Yeah. So Karen has gratefully accepted to be the moderator tonight to ask the questions that we've kind of put together for our panel. You're going to hear all kinds of stuff, and there probably will be questions, as I said. You should have a note card, or I have some extras, so feel free to write down your questions and pass them to Jane or myself. But with that, Karen, let me just write there. I have to put the glasses on for the bio. I just wanted to read a little bit about Karen. Karen's been doing this. Oh, okay, Karen. This one. Oh, I was like, there we go. Karen is a seasoned professional with expertise in the business sector as well as educational and nonprofit sectors. No matter what the context or positional role, Karen continuously advocates for equity and justice for all, whether it be through access to higher education, affordable housing initiatives, career access, equitable workforce opportunities, economic justice, or building inclusive workplace culture. Through founding and directing Courageous Conversations Towards Racial Justice since 2016, she works to bring community together to build bridges to understanding across race, culture, and ethnicity. Our Courageous Conversations model has been implemented at Boston College, and we have worked with many towns, communities, and organizations in this important work of cross-cultural dialogue in diversity, equity, and inclusion. I'm currently working independently as a consultant in the equity and justice field. Karen is in the process to form a new nonprofit to offer retreats to support Black and Brown professionals with restoration from workplace trauma and systemic harms. Stay tuned for more on that undertaking.
Thank you, Deb. You know, I thought I rarely introduce myself or say anything about my background. I'm like, some people don't really know. Like, what do? I don't even sometimes say my name. It's terrible. I take that for granted. But thank you, Deb. Deb was like, shouldn't we introduce you? And I'm like, all right. I will. Thank you for inviting me to that space. And we have such impressive panelists to introduce to you. So with that, I'm going to start with our distinguished guest from out of town, David Leonard. We are blessed to have David with us, who is the president of the Boston Public Library. He's been there at the 170-year-old library since 2016. Where he's in the role of steward of one of Boston's finest educational, cultural, and civic treasures. He oversees a collection estimated to contain more than 23 million books, maps, manuscripts, prints, and an ever expanding digital collection, along with historic central within the historic Central Library, Copley Square. And I always want to have my wedding there. It's like, it's just that beautiful. I know, so I hear, if it ever happens again. And he oversees also the 25 neighborhood branches. Since his appointment as president of the library by Marty Walsh, he and the board of trustees, David's focus has been on ensuring that the library develops as a leading 21st century institution. It's able to provide dynamic and necessary library experiences and welcome the scholars of Boston, Massachusetts, and beyond. Prior to his appointment, David served as the library's interim president. He also led the library through significant branch improvements and enhancements to the library's collections and management, and what was it, a $73 million renovation, which is amazing. David's background prior to the Boston Public Library spans academia, nonprofit sector, and more than a decade of private IT consulting, counseling clients about business development, management, and technology. David is currently a candidate for a PhD program in library information scientist as a library information scientist at Simmons, and his bachelor's is in philosophy and mathematics and masters in philosophy. So, very impressive. So welcome back. Next, we are glad to be hosted by the Milton Public Library and William Adams, that is our director here at the Boston, at the Milton Public Library. Will brings many years of experience working in other Boston area libraries and served as an elected library trustee for 9 years in Abington. He's the past president of the Massachusetts Library Association, the MLA, which is why he brings such great insight and depth of understanding to some of the topics that we're going to be raising tonight. He's currently co-chair of the MLA's Legislative Committee, which is working on with legislators to address the rise in the book challenges and other censorship activities in Mass. So welcome, Will. And so we can get a little bit of that local perspective. We have invited Josh Coben, who is a teacher and has spanned a career of over 30 years in the Milton Public Schools as a teacher, and most recently as a library scientist within the elementary schools, where he finds a way to spread his schedule across 4 elementary schools. He is currently the librarian, like I said, for the 4 MPS schools. And to no one's surprise, he loves books, he loves reading, he loves writing them, and has published 2 volumes of poetry. So Josh, welcome to our And next, we have a distinguished author who I met several years ago. It's funny how things just come around. But Michelle Jenkins joins us, who has recently published a book and is going to tell us a little bit about her experience that Deb introduced. And let's get to that. Sure, Michelle has a wonderful media career underway, but she's not just an author, but a lifelong advocate for personal development, dedicating over 40 years, a noble pursuit of positivity and positively impacting people's lives around her. She serves as a director of diversity, equity, and inclusion, and has provided the opportunity to pursue her calling. Through the written word, she has endeavored to weave narratives that transcend the ordinary and strives to empower and uplift. Her book, The Mothers of Black Boys in Action, unleashes the brilliance of boys of color. It has been a privilege for her to guide countless individuals on their paths of self-discovery, and she also is a podcaster, Unleashing Your Brilliance. So that's a platform where she explores the boundless potential within each of us. And more recently, producing a movie. So we have a lot to learn from Awesome. So with that, why don't we start with expounding on anything that was left out of your bio. Yes, we'll go one by one. But David, why did you accept this invitation to be with us? Without telling us what you're doing in the work, just like the intro about why this was important for you.
Well, I think we're at a crossroads in American democracy, honestly, and not to put too fine a punch on it, but it does appear that this is the one area within the library world and the publishing world where some of these issues are surfacing, and we can't ignore them. We need to respond. In some cases, we need to understand, what are these challenges or these attempts at censorship really about? Who do they impact? And what's really going on? And I think, Pew and Aspen and other institutes have long championed libraries, whether it's school libraries, public libraries, academic libraries, other libraries, as being one of the remaining trusted institutions in society. And this issue both calls that a little into question, but also, I think, calls us to stand up for how do we respond to this moment, and how do we provide inclusive opportunities without closing off other people's access to information.
I can't say what David said any way better, so I'll just talk about a different aspect of this, so it's really well said. The other thing that brings me here is, it's the silence of the voices, which is really what comes down to, but also the impact it has on the people using our public libraries, our school libraries, and part of that's about access, part of that's about being able to see themselves in our different institutions, and the second part of that is the impact this conversation at this point in time is having on librarians and library workers, particularly in school libraries, public library front lines, where we're seeing people who got into a profession that they love leaving very early or looking other places, because you can only bend so much before you start to break, and in different parts of the country, people are hitting these breaking points. And here in Massachusetts too, people are dealing with a lot of different things, and it's a hard position for many people in the library world right now.
I'm here because in a long career in education, which again out of love and wanting to serve children and wanting to work with children, being in the classroom sometimes and sometimes acting as librarian, sort of back and forth. I never felt that my role was seen as somehow a nefarious one. There have certainly been disagreements, where parents, community members express reservations about a lesson or a child, but I mostly felt like there was a presumption that we were both trying to do the best for a child. And when I became a school librarian, which actually has happened several times over the last sort of 14 years, I thought that I was just entering a paradise. I mean, what is better than a library? Who doesn't love books? I mean, libraries are the most amazing places in the world. It's like the universal embassy where everyone gets to walk in and we're welcome. And I can't think of a better place to work. And yet, it has become such a minefield. And especially when it comes to education, where the library intersects with our schools and our children, and particularly our young children. And I did not walk into this wanting to storm a barricade or wave a banner. I wanted to work with kids, and I wanted to open their minds and get them excited about learning and about reading. And I found myself caught up in a very bitter tug of war that has drawn, if a sword is not available, we'll take a salt shaker, we'll take whatever. Everything gets drawn into the battle and is weaponized. And I certainly did not seek this, but now that I'm in the middle of it, I think it's such an important thing to discuss, to talk about, and so I'm grateful for this opportunity to do just that.
Hi. Yeah, I'm here because I have grandchildren, and it's important that they be educated, they have certain exposures, and they have some that I don't necessarily want them exposed to. And as an author, I remember writing my book, and I remember thinking to myself, should I say this? Can I say this? Will this be controversial? And then what stopped me from limiting myself was that there was a message, there was education, there was the experience of my experience that they can actually take on and probably grow from, develop from. And it freed me up in writing. And I talk about topics that are controversial. They're topics and conversations that need to be had, particularly between parent and child. My book is universal. I'm African American, and the book is titled Modern Action, Mothers of Black Boys, because that's what I had. And it's about unleashing their brilliance, because all children are brilliant. and my platform is to unleash that for them, to have them see what's possible, like getting into the trenches. I happen to be with my grandchildren this weekend, this week, and my son handed me a book, and he said, "Look at this," and he walked away, and I opened the book, and the book, now I have it that I'm open, I'm the one that can hear anything and be anywhere, and I flipped through the book, and it was a book for young children, 5-year-old children, and it was a subtle message regarding transgender children. But it wasn't a child being male or female. It was a child being a pony. And it was okay to be a pony. And I'm reading this book, and this open-minded grandma here actually began to feel as though it may be too much. And then the conversation in my head was, is it too much? And it's always that choice. When do we have these conversations? Should we have these conversations? So I'm here to discover, I've done research since I've been invited, and a lot has opened up where I may have been biased, and now it's a different conversation happening now. There's just a whole lot in so many different levels for each of us, as parents, grandparents, teachers, educators, to dwell in. So I'm here to, discover what's next in this conversation.
So, and now we'll put it out to the general, whoever wants to be out of the way. So this is two-part. Are there valid reasons to ban books, and what is the harm caused by banning books?
Will can go first. I'm in his territory.
I mean, it'll be quick. No. Just generally, no. There's not reason. There aren't reasons to ban books. Do libraries read books and get rid of books? Sure, we do. We get rid of books that have gone out 60 times. We get rid of books that are outdated travel books, but that's not banning books. Libraries don't. We're not in the business of banning books. So I can't think. It was two-part though.
The harm caused by
Yeah, no, the harm is just, it's access, and that's what I said earlier, libraries, if you were to ban a book, you're not only sending the message that book's not okay, whatever was talked about in that book is not okay, and if you identify at all with that book, that means you're not okay. That's the message that the ban sends. So I would just say that.
I'd like to lay a little bit of the context in terms of what's going on. So back in the 1890s, I'm not going to give a history lesson, I promise you, but for about 10 years or so, the Boston Public Library had this section called the Inferno, where it would place books that were not deemed appropriate for the general public to have. But we quickly grew out of that, realizing that it's important for a library to hold books for everybody. In the case of the public library, it is very much a choose-your-own-adventure experience. You, your grandparents, your caregivers decide what is the right time to read a certain book. And I don't think anyone wants to be in the way of that. I'll give you a caveat to that in a second. Secondly, we're also not going to say that someone can decide what someone else shouldn't read. That's a bridge too far in terms of the vision of the public library. In terms of the national context, so we had the Inferno back in the 1890s, right? We had periods where things like a later Lady Chatterley's Lover or Maurice or now classic books were deemed not appropriate for the everyday person. And so if we look prior to 2021 nationally, these are ALA numbers, there were about 300 on average challenges that would come up for books throughout the country. In 2021 and 2022, that jumps to 1,900 and 2,600. and Massachusetts, fourth largest number of book challenges in the country among all of the states and territories in 2022. So let us not think that this isn't an issue here at home. In Boston, for the public library, we have not seen an uptick in challenges to books within our collection, but we do have people challenging why we do LGBTQ programming or why we have Black Lives Matter signs or programs in our libraries. And so this echoes the theme. If you look at the top 13 books that ALA has tracked have been challenged, they're all either about topics of racial justice or they are topics about LGBTQ inclusion by authors or for people who want to understand these topics better. It includes books like All Boys Aren't Blue, which is a wonderful story about a black boy coming out as gay. One of Toni Morrison's books, The Bluest Eye, is the third most challenged topic on the list. So I just want to lay that out as a little bit of the context for what we're seeing and what we're experiencing. And I think it's important to realize that, yeah, it is a choose your own adventure. It is up to the family, the primary caregiver, to be in dialogue with their child about when is the right time to read a certain book. And I think the examples we've heard already say, well, this brought up questions. What better purpose for a book is there than to bring up the questions so you can engage in dialogue? By the way, these kids are resourceful. If these books are banned, they're going to go find the information somewhere else. And I know I would rather have a trained librarian in dialogue with parents who can have the conversation about what maybe they need or not. I'll close this section with this note. I came out as a gay man at 20 years of age in Ireland in the 1980s. There were no role models. There was no language about what it meant to be gay. There was no vocabulary for me to be able to have that conversation with my dad at an earlier age. Had these books been available then, maybe I would have started my journey to wholesome selfhood a little bit earlier than I was able to. And yes, I did use, for me, it was my college library that had books that I could go discover who am I, what are these feelings I'm having about. And so this is real, this is personal, and I don't know that we can prescribe the right time for any individual or any family, but we should not be closing these off from some other people's journeys.
Yeah, we have nothing much to add. How about you?
Let's see. Yeah, like it eliminates opportunity for development and growth by having something be disappeared, like having something be taken away, or not affording the opportunity for individuals from different backgrounds, different mindsets, different ethnic groups to explore one another. I was invited to a book group. The title of the book was Me and White Supremacy. I was the only African American in the group. And the development that we all experienced behind listening to one another and talking to one another, lives were changed. Things were being seen and things were being done by things being seen now. I'll give you an example. There was a gentleman in the group, well, it's Caucasian, I'm not one, right? But he said that he was in Target and there was an African American woman walking with her children, and she gets to the door and someone comes over and says, "Can I see your receipt?" And when he walked by, they just said, "Be on your way." And he noticed that. He hadn't noticed that prior to us coming together, having these conversations. And I said to him, "So what happened after that? You saw something, did you say something?" And he said, "That's why I slipped." Like I didn't, but it was just the opportunities that we have when we're together, when we're talking, and when that happens, so many things disappear in the process of that because we become one in that, and we can hear, differences in a whole new way. So it's all opportunity to have the exposure to books.
Yeah,
Josh, tell us, how is this confronting you in the schools? You know, the public libraries, I know here in Milton, you know, aren't getting the pressure that you are there in the schools and you're front line, and express to us and share some of the challenges and what are some of the good aspects. I mean, hopefully there's support from the community, and also maybe let us know what can we do to better advocate and ally with you.
Yeah, no, thank you. I mean, first, I want to say on the issue of banning and its effects. When it comes to a school library, what it means is that there are certain children for whom this is the only library they may ever visit in their child. And so when we close off avenues, voices, that loss might be total. And of course, the message sent by saying certain voices can't be heard is to say that certain ways of being or certain identities are not okay, or at least so controversial that they can't even be discussed. And librarians and certainly teachers and very much school librarians think a lot about who is seen, who is represented, whose experiences can be talked about. And when we remove books willy-nilly because we feel that they're not good for us, there are kids out there who need those books. And one of my big goals as a school librarian is it's now become a cliche, but the idea of mirrors and windows, that books can reflect ourselves back to ourselves, so that we feel seen and less alone, and also give us windows into other experiences. And by banning those books, we are shattering both of those. We're removing those mirrors for the kids who need those mirrors, and we're blocking off those windows for kids who need to see outside their own experience and understand others. So my experience in all of this has been, it's been both about pushback about certain books, similarly things often having to do with LGBTQ people, and race, racism, and the pushback has also sometimes been about lessons, because I do approach my role as a teacher, and I do create lessons rather than with the books that I share, and so sometimes people have objected to the lessons, sometimes to the books, sometimes to both, and it is hard to see what benefit we get in peremptorily shutting down these perspectives, or to deny that some of the things that we talk about, yes, even in elementary school, are not in fact part of these kids and their families' lives. And is to tell some kids that their families are not okay, or can't be discussed, or they themselves. And we don't know who they're going to develop into and what questions and what information will be important to them. But these students should always feel that there is an openness there to be welcome. And when I walk around a school, because I'm the only elementary librarian in Milton, I work with over 2,000 children. And so they all know me. I wish I could say I knew all of their names. In a strange way, I'm sort of this public figure in the small world of the elementary school. And so I get a lot of smiles and waves, and also people avoiding me, especially if they're older students. But I feel like one of my jobs is to just smile at them, to acknowledge them, to wave at them, to make them feel seen, even if I can't, produce their name in a second, because I want to be the embodiment of what the library is, which is a welcoming place and a non-judgmental place. I want them all to feel that they can be seen and heard and safe. And that does not mean that we have to all agree on it. It doesn't mean that we would all choose for our children the same books. And there may be things in some of those books that we strongly object to. But I think we need to have the humility to say, we don't know which books are right for which kids, and we can't make those corrective decisions for them or their families.
Thank you for that, Josh. That was really insightful. So if we could go into now, what steps are you taking in your libraries to push back, to make known the dangers of censorship? And I think Josh, you gave us a little bit of that and your perspective on the young minds and their care.
So I think we could probably all talk to probably at least 3 realms in which we're pushing back or taking a stance. One is the support and protection for library staff. I think that's so important. Who are feeling the effects of this, the shift from being trusted in paradise to being threatened and challenged. And even if there aren't actual books being removed, we talk to colleagues around the country who say there's a chilling effect on what I choose to buy for my collection. It's not maybe fully banned or not prevented from it, but I want to avoid the controversy because that will get in the way of doing the work. So that's a secondary chilling effect of some of these challenges. So support for staff is essential. I think we'll probably talk about some of the statewide efforts, and I'll certainly chime in on that a little bit as well. But I do want to point out to one program, BPL, Boston Public Library, joined in nationally about 2 months ago. It's called the Books Unbanned Initiative. Started by Brooklyn, and it now includes, I think we were 3rd, but it now includes Brooklyn, Seattle, LA County, Los Angeles City, and Boston. And this is a program that each of the institutions is making available to any in our case, any 13 to 26-year-old in the country who can point to books that they do not have access to as a result of a ban or a challenge in their state or their locality. They can apply and get a special BPL library card that gives them access to banned book collection digitally. And so, just to share a couple of the statistics from the first couple of months, we already have, sorry, I've lost my page, but 1,200 signups from all over the country, from every state in the nation, and also from Puerto Rico. And the top places where individuals have signed up from, there's a couple of, I could make a guess, but and you'll get some of them right. But so Texas, Florida, California, and North Carolina are the top 4 states where we have had subscriptions from. Half of them are 22 plus, and half of them are under 22 and under 18. And so there's a mixture of people signing up. I'll pass the microphone, but I have a couple of quotes I can share a bit later from, because the only thing we said was that you had to give us a sentence or two about why this is important to you, because we want to understand what is the local context, at least anecdotally, as to why people want to sign up.
Thanks, David. And I think I just want to remind everybody of something David said earlier, and I'm going to get it wrong. Those ALA statistics, the American Library statistics, we were fourth. We were 4th. So there's people using the BPL from all over the country, but remember, we were still the 4th most challenged state. So I'll talk a little bit about Milton Public Library first, and say, some of the things we do, or we talk about it. We talk about books and book challenges and these topics amongst ourselves. We did a book club for library staff earlier this year where we read books off the banned book list. So we read things like Genderqueer, we read things like The Bluest Eye, The Hate You Give, and we read it, one, so that people on the staff would know what's being talked about, right? Some of us may have read some of these books a long time ago, some of them are new books. So one, we were learning what's the fuss all about, what are these books? But two, having conversations like, what is, quote unquote, wrong with these books that people are challenging? And we were trying to talk about what's right with these books. Why do we have these books in our collection? So that's one thing. And our children's department too regularly reviews former award-winning books like Newbery and Caldecott books that we have in many public library collections as award-winning books, but do they stand the test of time, and kind of having conversations around some of the issues with some of these older titles. But David hinted I'll talk a little bit about what's happening at a statewide level, and until I see your eyes start to close. But there are currently 4 bills in the State House that address this topic in different ways. Okay, and we're trying right now to work towards one bill with the best language. There is a lot of support from our legislators, both in the House and the Senate. We have bills that have been introduced on both sides of the House, of the State House. But basically what these bills do is they address Chapter 78, which covers public libraries, and they are looking to do 2 things. One is to tie having a collection development policy, and a collection development policy is what protects the library from being able to buy and add books to the collection. Right? So that's part one is tying this collection development policy to state aid. Now, state aid means different things to different people. To David, it means about $1.1 million. To me, it means about $63,000. But they're both significant, okay? It's it's a scale thing, but it's very important. So that's part one, and the other part is kind of reinforcing both the collection development policy and the building and facility use for public libraries. And the bills, the current language we're looking for is trying to say that building use, library use, collection use should be in line with the state's anti-discrimination policy and public accommodation policy. And this is a move away from just a generic, like the ALA Bill of Rights. We're trying to tie it to state law. There's already public accommodation laws. There's already anti-discrimination laws. That's what we do already, and we just want to make that the legal standing. And part of that is also protecting library workers from being fired, being put on probation, being disciplined for following the collection development policies or being challenged in any way. Now, this is great for public libraries. It's not great for school libraries. We're working in a parallel line to introduce similar language through the Department of Education. Right? So that's a separate line that we're working on. And this is great. David and I were at a hearing at the end of October that made me cry. It would make you cry. The testimony of school librarians and public librarians about this topic. It was terrible, but it was also very powerful that they were sharing this with a very receptive group of reps and senators. And we're looking to follow that up with a legislative briefing in January. So there's support there. We just need to continue that call to action.
So maybe I'll get back to what I think you were asking about before, Karen, which is, more of my experience of what this has meant, in the Milton Public Schools. So for me, it really started a couple of years ago with some angry emails from parents objecting to certain books that I had read, lessons that I had taught, as I said, often about LGBTQ related books, and it sort of touched off sort of a firestorm in town. It started with emails directed at me, sent to principals, sent to the superintendent, sent to the school committee, and unbeknownst to me for a while, it then took on a life of its own in social media. And I think there were some local Facebook groups where people started, and I don't know if they were only local people or had expanded, but people who I later learned were following a script that has been used nationally, I guess as a form of outrage and intimidation. So I was called a pedophile, and I was called a groomer, and someone suggested that a 51A be filed against me for child abuse. But this, strange as it is to say, I did not take it personally, because I learned that this is just par for the course. It happens across the country. I learned more that there are connections between national organizations and what happens locally. Some of my lesson slides wound up on national websites that wanted to hold them up, for opprobrium, and newspaper articles, and there are groups and organizations that seek out examples to hold up for ridicule and for condemnation, and it does get personal. Except as I said, that many of the things said all revolve around the same sort of talking points. And I have not seen everything that was posted about me. I don't know if I would enjoy seeing all of that. But what was lovely in Milton is that for a while I felt very alone and vulnerable. And it felt like, the world sort of crashing down on me. I was fortunate to get support from the schools, from the administration, and then the Milton community just really rose up, and people were sort of fighting back on social media in my defense, and parents created an online petition that I think 1,100 people signed in support. Students I had many years ago, parents of former students, all kinds of things. And it really felt wonderful, because I didn't feel that it was all about me, or that I was alone, or that everyone in Milton, felt that I was an abomination. And it really turned into a very affirming story where I think people, once they found out what was going on, really rallied and came out strongly. And I would like to say that has settled things forever in Milton, but it is not. It continues. I'm just going through another round of it right now, and it may go on yet more. But I will never forget the support I got from so many people in Milton and surrounding places, and even farther away, who reached out to me, emailed me, and that really meant a lot to me personally, because if we're talking about chilling effect, I know that teachers get mixed signals. They're told, to be brave, to stand up, and to take chances, and dare to fail. Of course, all the things that we would also tell our students. And then there's, of course, another side that is maybe waiting to vilify us. And I've heard just recently from some of my colleagues, classroom teachers, saying, I do not feel comfortable going near anything like what you do, because I've seen what happened to you. So the chilling effect is real.
I just want to add a little bit, thanks. We're really fortunate in Milton, like Josh said. There are communities, and Karen asked, like, how, what can people do? There are communities where, there's groups that follow teachers and librarians home, right? There's communities where the groups get together and run to take over school committees or different. So just be aware of what's happening in our community, and being here is part of that. But there are groups. I've got a list because these are some of the groups active in Massachusetts that are getting candidates to run on single topics. There are Moms for Liberty groups in Massachusetts. The Mass Family Institute. Some of them appeared, at least one lawyer appeared at this hearing that we were at, and that was a little chilling. Mass Informed Parents, Parents Defending Education, Mass Resistance. So there are multiple groups active in Massachusetts that are affecting local politics and local choices.
Thanks for that, Will.
Oh, I also just wanted to say thanks to the Milton Public Library for also being a real supporter. As the only elementary librarian, I don't really have many colleagues, and to be able to have people like Will and Sarah Trove, the assistant director of this library, a great staff here, it meant a lot to me. I felt less alone for having them as colleagues.
So, Michelle, I want to come to you, because as an author, I heard you say, if you're an author, you kind of want to be on that list because you're on the right track. Like you're saying stuff that brings change and gets people's minds opened in the way that they need to be opened in these days that we're hearing about the erasure and anti-wokeism. So, how would that feel for you to have your book be out?
Yeah, it's interesting. I would like it. When I had an opportunity to read my book in front of a group, I had the opportunity to read my book early on. It was published in June this year. And I had the opportunity to read it, and I knew when I wrote this book, 2 words were going to be a conversation for people. The one was black, and the other was boy. Boy, particularly in the African American community, it has history. Yeah. That's slave owner would call him boy, and so there's a reaction to it. But if you look it up in Webster, it doesn't say anything about that. But it's a world that African Americans swim in. And I thought about, like I said earlier, about certain topics. I talk about protecting your children from predators, right? I talk about police targeting young black boys when my son had a gun pointed at him. And it didn't matter that I lived in the suburbs. It didn't matter that we were in a particular environment. He was a boy with brown skin. And there's so many things to open up and discover about the world of a African American woman raising a boy of color. My son has done some pretty extraordinary things. I started when he was a little boy in kindergarten, and I did work with him to the point where he's 44 years old now, to the point where his boss called me and said, "Your son is astonishing. He's been with us 22 years. What did you do? We want to interview you to get the backstory of what you did. And we want to write an article about him in our newsletter." And being a proud mom, I posted it on Facebook, like, my son is possible, just to share it. And I had 5,000 women respond to that post saying, "Can you support me? Can you coach me? Do you have a book? Do you have a podcast?" And it was overwhelming. And I realized that in my 40-some odd years in personal development and demonstrating what it looks like to raise a successful, extraordinary boy of color, in spite of everything that went on. And I didn't want to write the book as though everything was just so wonderful. No, there were moments, he was kidnapped by his dad. I talked about that. And I even was reluctant to mention that because of it. And I didn't mention his dad's name. I just said it in a way that was, you could get it. And I didn't, and I said it, but before I even decided to write that, I had the background thought, like, what is his father going to think of it? But I had to speak all of that because I wanted them to know, the readers to know, that I've been in the trenches with all the good, with all the bad. So for my book to be banned, it would missing for a lot of women, parents, teachers, coaches, mentors, whomever. It's not a book for Black boys, it's a book for everybody. It's ironic that most of the owners of my book, they're not Black. They're giving books away to everybody, so it's a universal conversation, you know, and it all is. You know, when we have an opportunity to be in an environment with something other than what we know, maybe an opposing point of view of something, or something you don't even want to be bothered with, those are the opportunities to step into and be a part of. Because you never know what's going to come out of it. Just like the conversation with my son and I had with the book he handed me, I had so many like reactions in my head about like, how do I read this? How would I read this to my grandchild? Like, how would I do that? And my grandchild, of all the books, that was the book he kept bringing over to me with the pictures. Even my son said he's never been this interested in a book. But it was the pictures, and it was, some of them were like a little different. But, you know, that could be an opportunity, and who knows? You know, it would be up to us to decide when, but to ban books, they have to really deliver something that would impact people in a way that you couldn't recover from in terms of money.
So we're gonna wind up our formal presentation here, but we're gonna have some questions coming in. Some are coming from Zoom as well, so we'll take it to that. Before we do, so it's almost 8 o'clock, and we'll do that for about 20 minutes. David, I want to hear some of the quotes from some of the people around the country, some of these young adults around the country, and what this opportunity meant for them, means for them.
Sure. I live in Florida, and I don't want to lose access to queer literature. I am queer, and being able to access queer literature is important to me. I'd like to have access to books that I can't access or are banned in Ohio. As a queer, disabled Latina, many of the books where I can see myself represented are banned, and I want to be able to see myself reflected in the books I read. My state is banning books. My school has cancelled our book fair. I would like to access books that shouldn't be banned to begin with. Knowledge is power, from Texas. And it goes on. I don't know if we're reaching more adults or more young people, or if this has more symbolic value than material difference in people's lives. Regardless, it clearly mattered to 1,500 or 1,200 people so far. And that's just BPL among the 5 we're doing this.
What an amazing initiative. Where did that come out of? Where was it?
It was started by Brooklyn Public Library, as I refer to the other BPL. And we actually got to do a panel together on this. They were early. I think New York Public also has a similar initiative with a few other partners under the ALA banner. So I think this is not about, there's one answer, but it is about libraries standing up. And just in terms of listening to Josh's story, Will's thoughts, we need to protect the workers, we need to protect the freedom to read, and we need to protect libraries' ability to purchase and acquire these materials. So it's really a trifold approach.
Thank you. Will, any parting sentiments you want to add that maybe you didn't get to?
Well, I'll just say, I was writing notes while we were all talking, and one of the things, you mentioned Jodi Picoult really early on in this, and she's signed on with a number of Penguin and Random House authors to a lawsuit in, I think it's Iowa, because so in Massachusetts, we're trying to strengthen the freedom to read. In other states, they're trying to squash the freedom to read. So some of these authors are speaking up and signing on to these bills. And you mentioned, you want to be on these lists. Stephen King was quoted as like, if I was a kid, and I'm telling this to kids, this is Stephen King, if you hear a book is banned, go to your public library, go to the bookstore and get that book, And then, not to change topics, but there was a lot of people might have seen this because somebody just used the term book fairs. Scholastic, not a library, but Scholastic has changed their book fairs. So they're offering book fairs, and then they're offering censored book fairs. So where they're trying to avoid this controversy. It gets back to that, chilling effect. I go home some nights where we'll put out a new book display, and I'll go home and I'll be like, I shouldn't have to think when I go home, am I going to get a call in the morning? Is it going to be on Milton Neighbors? Is it like just by putting a book display up, right? But that's the chilling effect, and it's almost with everything now. So, those are just a couple of random thoughts.
Anything come to mind? There'll be more opportunity, yeah.
Yeah, I just did a little research on books that are banned. Here they are: The Great Gatsby, The Catcher in the Rye, The Grapes of War, To Kill a Mockingbird, The Color Purple, Autobiography of Angela Davis, The New Kid by Jerry Croft, Beloved by Toni Morrison. You mentioned that. I Know Why Birds Sing by Maya Angelou. Cage Birds Sing, right? The Lord of the Flies, Are You There, God? And the most banned book was 1984 by George Orwell.
Library nerd stuff. It's been argued that the first banned book in America, even though it was 1637, so we weren't quite America yet, was in Quincy, and it was Thomas Morton's New English Canaan, and it was because it was anti-Puritan, right? So religion's another topic, but that hasn't been what we've been dealing with lately. But then historically too, one of the first big national movements for book bans was Uncle Tom's Cabin, in the 1800s, and then in the 1900s it was James Joyce's Ulysses. Those were kind of ones that made the national news too.
And of course, stamped from the beginning.
Right.
Your extending that was high on the list. Which is now out on Netflix. Watch it if you haven't yet.
What was it?
Ivermec's Kindred, stamped from the beginning. Oh yeah, so there's going to be a list of resources over on the table, and I think we'll email out that to people that registered as well. So one question from Zoom, and we're going to collect questions from the people in the room as well. So from Zoom, we have, what do you do with books that encourage bigotry or white dominant culture or theocracy?
So as a research library, as well as a public library, it's important that we have items in our collection because they will serve historical interest. We actually have an example of a couple of books that I would consider not necessarily for, I wouldn't want to promote them, let us say, but they were suggested by staff members and even I think someone from the Boston Public School System who wanted a copy of this to see what the other side was saying. So I think the point is these things need to be available, but it's up to the individual reader to decide why they're interested in something and what to do about that. Now, just because we have things in our collection, it's the famous Einstein quote, it's like every library collection should have something to offend everybody. But just because something's in our collection does not mean we're always promoting it.
Yeah, I mean, this comes up a lot for me. Our library collections have a lot of older books. You may not know, but your public schools have no budget for their libraries. So we depend on the kindness of strangers, community members, grants, donations. And so we do have many books that are outdated, and some that are classics, that are wonderful books in some ways, that also contain stereotypes that would sort of shock us today. And so I wrestle with that, like what is the value of this book? I don't want to be throwing things out willy-nilly. And we all have things that we may object to. And I think that's what we're talking about tonight. So I, just as a school librarian, I've had students, parents, staff, almost anyone you can think of, approach me on the side and say, have you seen this book? Like, this should not be in our library. So sometimes it's not a formal request. It's your friend, it's your colleague, it's your student. I had, one adult said that there should not be a nonfiction book about airplanes because it had a page or two about military aircraft, and this would be supporting militarism, and that was unacceptable with children. I had someone else object to an alphabet book because I don't know if you know the Palabala Dancers, they put out a picture book where they formed all the letters of the alphabet using their own bodies. And someone found that offensive. So we all have things that we are going to object to. We think this, I'm all for free speech, but this, no, not this. And now these are not easy questions. And when we're talking about an elementary school librarian, obviously there are many things that are not included in our collection. They must be geared toward the age group and all of that, but these are not easy questions. And so one of the things that, as I wrestle with this, as I look at our collections and consider what needs to be weeded out, as Will mentioned earlier, that's the metaphor we use, libraries are a garden, and sometimes you need to weed. And there are many, many classic books that you probably enjoyed as a child that you might be shocked, to reread and see certain things in. Little House on the Prairie, the only good Indian is a dead Indian. There were no people there, only Indians. There are lots of things now. I love the Little House books, reading them to my kids. I would never for a second say that we should throw them out. But I do feel an obligation as a teacher librarian, to discuss it with students. And so I do lessons about stereotypes, not to demonize books, not to say, oh, those horrible people back then, because sometimes the books are from right now, Clifford the Big Red Dog and the Berenstain Bears and all these great things. I'm not going to throw all that out, but and we cannot insulate our children from every possible prejudice, but we can educate them to identify it. We can educate them to have a critical eye about what they read and the images that they see.
Just going back to me sharing about my son and his wife and the book about transgender children, that my son had he had a view about it. He was open, but he still leaning towards, I don't really know. And his wife, surprisingly, she was born and raised in the church and a Christian girl, and she was way more open than we were about it. So it's just so interesting how individuals can sway. You don't know which way they're going to sway. I just thought that was extremely interesting.
Yeah, I think once you become a parent and they have 4-year-olds, your mind changes and opens in a different way. That could be my child someday. So of course I'm going to understand that. Everybody's looking at saying, how did it go? Here's a question from the audience. Is there, and this was one of the ones on my list too, what can we learn from previous historical book banning? And I know you all had some comments as we talked about possible questions. Book banning and censorship errors. What are some of the strategies to resist and remove bans or work through those things?
I'll say something real quick because that history repeats itself, right? So I think it's being vigilant. I think it's having conversations like this. I think it's confronting those loud voices, because oftentimes we're being hit with 2 or 3 loud voices where there might be 20 or 50 calm voices, but the calm voices don't always come out, right? In the late 1800s, early 1900s, there was a really, it was a big movement about what was appropriate, and books that included any kind of sex in it, what were pornographic, and they got, I can't remember if it was a U.S. senator or a rep, but it was Comstock, and they created something called the Comstock Law. So there was this movement to challenge and ban books, among other things, right? And it became law. So it could happen, it's happened in the past. So it's important to have conversations, and it's important to be aware at a local, it starts locally and builds its way up, right? So I talked about a couple of bills that are gonna be in the State House, and when it gets to the push comes to shove time, it's partially on us as librarians and library workers to reach out and say, hey, call Rep. Driscoll, call Senator Timothy, call whoever your local legislator might be. So that's, I'm bleak, right? So it's happened before, and we survived, but I think we don't want to let things get so far down the road that the loud voices win out in these challenges. And I think part of it is like going to your libraries and checking out these books, having conversations with your families about these books, and I don't want to say buying the books because I'm a librarian, but like buying these books and supporting the authors, right? Because when it comes down to it, right, we Josh talked about mirrors. We want people to see themselves in our books, but we also want to support the people who are writing those books too, because they're taking the chance and they're writing and they're sharing themselves. And while their books are the target's them. So yeah, it's being supportive of this creative community. Going on top is what that's.
Thanks, Phil. I think I'd make a couple of points about this. I find it ironic that 1984 is an example of a banned book, because that's a vision of an authoritarian dystopian society that bears somewhat of a similarity to what we're possibly starting to live through. But all joking aside on that front, why do people ban things? Why do people engage in forms of censorship? What are the other examples of societies that have gone through this? Forms of communism, forms of National Socialism. You don't have to look much further than the 20th century to understand what these are symbols of and what these are emblems of. And they signal, if left unchecked, a move towards certain forms of populism and authoritarianism. There are other examples of moves in that direction. And I think for all of us who are thinking about this, we have to ask ourselves, what are the individual motives of the individuals who are either stirring this? In what form is it a cry for help of some sort? In what form is it a form of disenfranchisement? And what is our response to that? Because for us tonight, we're talking about books as conversation starters and opportunities for discourse and opportunities to share our differences, either to see ourselves in them and discover ourselves, or just to understand a different point of view. So why is that frightening and threatening to some members of our society? So I'm unfortunately answering a question with a question, but this is the takeaway we should take away.
So the statement that Massachusetts has received the 4th highest number of challenges in the country. This person said, shocking. Yeah, and I think that probably shocked us all.
So what happens when a book is challenged? What are the, what does that mean? How do they go about doing that? Who are the heroes keeping them on the shelves?
I think each school library, each public library probably will answer this in their own way. The collection development policies that Will mentioned earlier are really the standard policy document. Most of the good ones do have a process in there. It is entirely possible something gets shelved in the wrong space or is in the wrong, that's a thing that can happen, right? And we just move it. But in most cases, these are works that have been selected by professional librarians who have training and experience to understand, what is in the right category for a given age group or a given topic. It's not always about, well, that means it's absolutely the right thing for this person at this age to read. That's a different conversation. But we'll accept a challenge, we'll review it, we'll check it, we'll make sure no one made a mistake, and then certainly with anything we've experienced so far, it stays on the shelf, and we have not encountered something where we have learned something in the challenge that says, oh, this shouldn't be in our collection or should be in a different part of the library. And we have a collection development policy that goes to that. What we don't want to be in the business of is moving those authorities or that review process to people who are not the experts, who are trained in the workforce, have the responsibility, are the best people to be making these decisions.
I'll just real quick mention, so David's hinting that there are states that are trying to lessen the role of library trustees and lessen the authority of library trustees. That's not happening here. So in our case in Milton, the library trustees could become involved if there is a challenge. But I would say one of the other heroes in this group of heroes in public libraries is the frontline staff. So we've been talking about challenges, and we've had the fourth most challenges in Massachusetts in the country. But we haven't had bans, right? So bans is when we take them out. That's happening in states, not so much here. So bans is bad, challenges isn't great. But our frontline staff has a lot of conversations about books when somebody might come up, especially in the children's room, and say, oh, why is this in the collection? Or is this in the right place? And it's those one-on-one conversations with the library professionals who stay up on these topics that keep it from going to the next level. Because oftentimes, if it's not a group like Mothers for Liberty or one of those, if it's an actual concerned resident, it's a conversation, and that's the best way for that.
Yeah, I see the difference between groups that come up with a list of dozens or hundreds of books that they've heard about and probably not read, that they have decided should be banned, versus a concerned citizen, parent, who's seen something that rubbed them the wrong way and have a genuine concern and would just like to speak to someone about what was the thought, why is this in the collection? And I see those as two very different things. So if someone who is genuinely wanting to have a conversation, who's willing to actually read the book, and then to abide by a decision made by a committee of different stakeholders that might include members of the community, staff. So it's not that I feel that librarians or teachers are beyond question, beyond reproach, that we rule by fiat and no one else can question the decisions. I think the library embodies civil discourse. It is thousands of volumes of people speaking to each other, if we are ready to listen. And there need to be places where that is possible. There are so few places where civil discourse is even possible anymore. We need to protect our libraries as those spaces. and a place where sometimes you come for comfort, and sometimes you come for sheer entertainment, and sometimes if you're lucky, you might be challenged in one of your opinions, and you might actually change your mind. We need to keep those spaces open.
So generated, what I generated today. I just want to read what I actually created. Intellectual freedom versus social concerns. One of the fundamental principles at stake is intellectual freedom, the right to access information and ideas without interference. On the other hand, concerns about inappropriate content, offensive language, or controversial themes have led to the banning of certain books, as you know. How do we strike a balance between preserving intellectual freedom and addressing social concerns? And, I too say that sitting together, having dialogue, whether it be, directed from the library and a mom at home, because it just makes the biggest difference when someone steps into an environment that they're so unfamiliar with, but they're willing. They're willing to have a conversation. Life alters when you don't want to, and you do it anyway. So yeah, it's like I still see how that could impact and make a difference.
So I was inspired in some of the research I did in finding artists against book bans that were going to Reading Rainbow, which is back in my day. He's really spearheaded quite a movement amongst artists, and it's just so inspirational. So I just wanted to, start to close out with one of the quotes. But after I offer this, I just want to hear from each of you. What's the hope? What's the hope in where you see the silver lining? So this is from author duo Adina Menzel and Karen Menzel. It's on all of us to support all kids against book bans. We must come together and continue to advocate for children of all backgrounds, races, genders, and sexual orientations, so they know they are loved, valued, and that we will stop at nothing to protect their rights. So where do you see the hope?
So I see a lot of hope. Here's kind of how I see some of the hope. So once upon a time, I was a teen, and when I was, the only controversial book was Go Ask Alice. And then once upon a time, I was a young adult librarian, and there were a few more books on the list, like Perks of Being a Wallflower, things like that. Now there are so many more voices than there ever were. There's so many more authors representing so many more people than there ever were. And yes, they're getting challenged, but they're there. So my hope, I guess my hope has come true in some extent, that there are these books now that they didn't exist 20 years, 10 years ago, 20 years, 30 years, whatever. But, and I'm hopeful that that will continue. I'm not saying I'm hopeful that book challenges will continue, but I'm hopeful that there will be books that continue to go out there that maybe make some people uncomfortable, but on the other side, make other people much more comfortable. And that's kind of where I see the hope and positivity here.
I'll share a couple of statistics and also a reflection on my study of public libraries over the last 20, 25 years. The internet arrived, and we all questioned what the future of libraries would be. I think we did okay eventually on that front. We've just come through, I think, 2 years of a pandemic and then 2 years of recovery from a pandemic, so a pretty challenging 4 years where certainly libraries were closed. Like, what do libraries do when they're actually closed for a period of that time? I'm happy to report, and BPL is an index for others. We're not the same as everybody else. We're not suggesting that we're always first or always last, but it's an index of what's going We're now at 99% of interactions with patrons, if you look at fiscal year 19 to fiscal year 22. So the year before the pandemic to this year just passed, we're at 99%. So we're back, right? Not universally, not in the same mixtures, but in aggregate form, we're absolutely back. Reading is still at the core of what we do. We do so many more things. There's so many important other things that are part of our mission. But reading is very much still at the core, literacy that goes with reading. Both borrowing of digital books and borrowing of physical books, the last 12 months, both grew by 10% for BPL. This gives me hope.
And to build on that, I want to say how wonderful it has been to see, I think really since maybe 2008, the financial collapse, how libraries really stepped up and became a huge community resource. The library of things, the place where people went to brush up their resume. It was a lifeline to so many people. And I think that has continued through the pandemic and a lot of our strife and struggles. I really see the library as such a central institution. Again, because it is one of the rare places of civil discourse, because it is a place where everyone is welcome. It should be a non-judgmental place. What other institution is there that says, come in, relax, challenge yourself, try something new, try something old, whatever you want. When a student comes into a library where I work, my goal is not to force them in any one direction. If they want to read a book that I have no desire to read, my only goal is to find that book for them and to make them happy. Anything they want to read, I'm happy for them to take it. And so I guess my hope at the end is with these children, who I think will increasingly demand and stand up for what they want to read, what they want to find out about. And our job is not to foreclose any possibilities, but to open them up.
Hey, I'm talking about inclusion. My hope is that when people read a book, they include all of what they're reading to get to the meat. There's a message in my book. There's many messages that many people have gotten and said it was life-changing for them. They were able to get past and be with the journey of that. So my hope is that when individuals read books, they don't stop when they get confronted. They use that and continue to dwell and discover. You all probably saw the Karate Kid, right? The scene where the master is saying, having him put the wax on the car, and he's irritated about why he's put the wax on the car. He doesn't know why, but he discovers that he had been doing that, taking the wax off, putting the wax on, and those motions supported him in being masterful at karate skills. He had no idea. So reading a book, and engaging in all of it, not knowing maybe why, there's like a light at the end of the tunnel.
What an amazing panel. Thank you for your input and great expertise over time. It's really amazing.
Just want to say thank you again one more time for everybody showing up tonight and being part of this courageous conversation. As we're listening to all the panelists that have, some writing or librarian skills, it reminded me of why I love the library so much. It's for everybody. It doesn't matter what religion, what your age, what your race, what your gender. It's for everybody. It's free. It gives people an opportunity to get out. I've taken my kids through all these years and all the books I've read. So I really, that's why I kept on thinking, Annette, come on up with me. She had never
Right library.
Yeah, and part of my job is I'm kids cooking with Miss Debbie, and I love going to the libraries. And I was telling David, I've been to most of the Boston Public Libraries doing classes, and the different kids that I meet in each library in each neighborhood. has exposed me to like so many different, I mean, I'm here at Milton Library all the time, totally different kids than what you're gonna find at the other libraries, have taught me so much. I mean, I would pay them to go teach at the libraries at this point, because of how much I've learned. But anyway, and Nat and I were the ones that took on this topic, and if it wasn't for her, we would never have been able to get through this. But again, Courageous Conversations, we do something every month. The book group is amazing. We touch on so many books. I know what got me into the whole Courageous Conversations was reading Just Mercy by Brian Stevenson, and then Waking Up White by Debbie Irving. So it's just like, and that was how many years ago? 19. Yeah, 7 years ago. It just, but like, how, and that's why I still do this work. But I really appreciate you guys coming out and supporting us here at the library. And then thank you again to our wonderful. Please get someone else food too on the way. On the way out, they want to get food.
I would like to just thank everyone, and books make a huge difference. A junior high school teacher told me I deserved more than knowing just Richard Wright, who I was reading at like 12. Because I wanted to see myself in books. My public library did not have myself there, but I had a teacher who kept giving me books, because my favorite books in junior high were Russian authors. So, I mean, I think these guys do wonderful things, and I enjoy using their process. Please help us keep libraries. There are cities that have publicly, they have gotten rid of. Houston does not have school libraries. So we need to take action. We need to protect these people, because sometimes they are taken out of the equation by other people. Thank you.